we're gonna do a video together again. Today, we're gonna do the darkest JRPG on every console. Get ready, everybody, because we're going to start with the PlayStation. I picked Xenogears. Why Xenogears? Why not Parasite Eve, which is pretty much a horror RPG? Why not Kudelka, which is also a horror RPG? Because actually, they could be used as honorable mentions. Yeah, there can be better honorable mentions than those two RPGs. But I think Xenogears is the darkest of them all because of the story. It's just a story that gets so many interesting twists that you're like, I mean, what the hell is going on? I mean, when you play that game, you're like, what? This is so dark. And why didn't this get a mature rating? Probably because of some censorship and stuff, and you know. So Xenogears, yeah, it's such a dark and twisted story. Very philosophical, very religious. It defies religion. It questions religion like no other game in existence that I've ever seen. It's such a unique story, and the way the story is told to you, it's told in such a dark way. And there's a plot twist regarding Faye. Faye has these psychological issues that are like, what the hell, man? And when you find out about that and all those confrontations and all those emotional scenes and all those explanations, not just the religious part of it, but the psychological part of it regarding Faye, I mean, that's just so freaking dark that it's, I mean, in my opinion, it's definitely the darkest JRPG on the PS1. What about you guys? Anyway, Vagrant Story. Vagrant Story, definitely. Why didn't I think of that one? Xenogears is still darker though, but yeah, Vagrant Story, definitely. Alondra 1, yeah, Alondra, it's not really that dark, but it has some dark moments, the nightmares and stuff like that, so yeah, you might be onto something, man. Yeah, it's pretty damn dark. Cartia, the Word of Fate, yeah, it's very political, there's a lot of politics and corruption involved in there, it's kind of mature, the storytelling isn't, you know, Final Fantasy Tactics will be another one, it's kind of dark, but Cartia is a little bit darker in my opinion. Yeah, Cartia definitely a good pick. For the PS2, I chose Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, but it's a bit of a tie with the first Drakengard. But I'm sticking with Nocturne because the only difference is that I beat Nocturne. I've never beaten or finished Drakengard, but I've seen what it's about, I've seen the scenes, the cutscenes, the blood and gore, the psychological stuff in there. Hell, even I have spoiled myself with a few scenes because of research, because I've talked about Drakengard before in previous videos, and I was like, man, I just refuse to finish that game until it gets remastered. But yeah, I can't really speak that much about Drakengard because I never finished it. But the one that I did finish was Nocturne, and that's a blast, and it's one of the darkest, if not the darkest, Shin Megami Tensei game ever. There's gotta be others that maybe never came out of Japan, but Nocturne has a way of handling the storytelling in a specific way that doesn't get too sidetracked with friendship dialogue or meaningless cheat chat, stuff like that. And this territorial dispute between the demons is pretty interesting, and how it's handled, you know, I think it's so pretty much, well, this is a game that kind of represents a bit of a metaphor, kind of represents a lot of turf wars in real life, a lot of territorial wars, a lot of political corruption in there, and how human emotions always end up getting the best of you when you're in a position of power, right? And that's the beauty of Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne. It plays around with that masterfully, and it does such in a dark way. And I don't want to spoil anything, but take a look at the main antagonists, you know. Who are the main antagonists in Nocturne? I mean, we're talking about the devil himself, you know. It's mind-blowing. And when you talk to these characters and you see another side of them, you know, these wise people, these wise characters in Nocturne, you gotta get a different perspective on religion, just like in Xenogears, and like a different perspective. It's another game that questions religion, questions beliefs, questions cultures, society. It's a wonderful game, man. But yeah, Drakengard, the first one, it's my biggest honorable mention. Okay, so what about you guys? Persona 3, definitely. Persona 3 is one of the darkest Persona games. Digital Devil Saga, absolutely. Anything from Shin Megami Tensei from that era. Why would you mention La Pucelle Tactics? Because it does have some heavy religious themes, but it's mostly played for laughs. Okay. Okay, I respect that, but La Pucelle Tactics. Oh my god. Persona 4? Okay, yeah, I mean, because of the murders and yeah, it's dark. It's dark, alright. Shadow Hearts. Thanks for bringing it up. I was like, I'm just waiting for someone to bring up Shadow Hearts. Absolutely, yeah. Probably my number 3 darkest JRPG on the PS2. Final Fantasy 12. Yeah, because the story is more mature. Forget about Van and Penelo, the protagonists. Those guys suck. But if you focus on the real main characters, Bosch and Ash, and their political stories, and the judges, yeah, I agree with that. You know, definitely Final Fantasy 12 is not as dark as Shadow Hearts or Drakengard, but there you go. Did someone mention Valkyrie Profile 2? Yeah, it's definitely dark, absolutely. Xenosaga, I mean, if we already mentioned Xenogears, Xenosaga is kinda just as dark, a lot of psychological themes in there, religious. Yeah, Xenosaga, definitely. The entire trilogy, pretty damn dark. Moving on to the PlayStation 3, I got Drakengard 3. I mean, come on, anything from Yoko Taro. If it wasn't that, it was gonna be Nier. Okay, but Drakengard 3, sure, it's a bit of a comedy, but there's also a lot of madness in there, a lot of darkness and blood and gore and political incorrectness, and it's just the character's personality, what she says, she has this no bullshit and I don't give a shit attitude about life and about everything and everyone. She just wants revenge. The plot itself is to get revenge and viciously kill her sisters who betrayed her. I mean, it's just, yeah, there's a lot of humor in there. I understand that, but there's just so much darkness in that game that's just, it's madness. It's madness, man. What about you guys? Folklore, definitely. Folklore is one of the darkest. It's a very unusual game. You play it and you're like, oh, this is a Western game, right? No, it's a Japanese RPG, right? But Folklore, definitely. Did someone mention Atelier Totori? Oh, man. Resonance of Fate. Yeah, it's kind of dark. The story's dark. Yeah. What else? Come on, guys. No one's gonna mention Lost Dimension. Not that dark, but I mean, you gotta kill one of your party members on every chapter. Isn't that dark enough? Trinity Souls of Zilol. Definitely, because it's a dark fantasy RPG. The setting itself, it's a game about revenge. I mean, the theme is revenge, and there's dark fantasy involved, and it's a dark game, so there we go. The Witch and the 100th Night. Let's move on. For the PlayStation 4, obviously I'm gonna go with Death End Request 2. I mean, you can't beat that. PlayStation 4 has a lot of dark JRPGs, more than the PS3 and the PS2. Trust me, okay? But Death End Request 2, it blew me away last year, and I don't think I've ever seen a darker JRPG than that. Released outside of Japan, Japanese. I know there's a lot of indie RPGs that are much darker, Western RPGs or Japanese exclusives that are much darker than this one. But out of all the ones that I played, officially localized outside of Japan, Death End Request 2 is the GOAT. It kills everything. It puts every single other JRPG to shame. I mean, it's a horror RPG, and horror not in the survival horror like in Resident Evil or Parasite Eve, no. Horror as in some horrendous things happening there. Torture, sacrifice, murders, killing. Oh wow, the beginning of the game, man. I can't show it to you guys, because it offends YouTube. But the beginning of the game is like, you play the game and 5 minutes later you're like, what the hell am I playing here? What the hell? Is this really an RPG? What about you guys? Tales of Berseria. Yeah, one of the darkest Tales game, up there with Rebirth. But I haven't played Rebirth. But yeah, Tales of Berseria, definitely. Persona 5. Yeah, all the Persona games are kind of dark. I mean, but Persona 5 is like a stretch in my opinion, but it is dark. The Mary Skelter trilogy. Yeah, even though those games focus a lot on fan service and the kinkiness stuff, if you pay attention to the story and the premise and the lore about it, they're pretty damn dark. The Mary Skelter trilogy, definitely. Someone just mentioned Bloodborne. Obviously, Nier Automata. Oh, everything from Yoko Taro. That guy is dark as hell, so definitely Nier Automata. Death End Request, the first one you mean? Okay. Oninaki. Oninaki, yeah. Thanks for bringing that game up, man. Definitely dark. Of course. Someone mentioned Made in Abyss. I haven't played it. I know there's a game with that name, and I want to play it. But yeah, it looks childish, but it isn't. I've seen footage of it, and it looks pretty damn dark. Made in Abyss, definitely. Code Vein, of course. It's not East 9. It's not a stupid answer. It's probably the darkest East game in the series. You know, up there with Falgana. I think East 9 is dark. There's a lot of darkness to it, and when you get to the plot twist and you realize what's really going on, it is pretty damn dark. I don't think it's a stupid answer, man. East 9, definitely, it's a pretty dark game. And finally, Soul Hackers 2. Okay, yeah, it's pretty damn dark as well. Yeah, enough honorable mention. Let's move on to the PlayStation 5. We're gonna get some of the same honorable mentions because some of the games are on PS4 are also on PS5. My PS5 answer is going to surprise you. I picked Yakuza Like a Dragon. Sure, there's a lot of comedy, and Ichiban Kasuga is a funny guy, and there's a lot of light-hearted nature in that game, but pay attention, I mean, it's a mature setting. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of crime in there, a lot of alcohol and smoking and drugs and brothels. Talk about all the adult life, you know, in the streets. I mean, you play in a world. The game's called Yakuza. Yakuza, these are the criminals in Japan, right? It can't get any darker than that. Yeah, I know it's it's like a dumb answer, you know, but play the game, and if you leave, it's like Drakengard 3. Leave the comedy aside and focus on the darkness of Yakuza Like a Dragon. It's like, what the... I mean, there's barely any RPGs like that. What about you guys? PlayStation 5. Don't mention PS4 games. PlayStation 5, stick to PS5. Someone said Final Fantasy 16. Naturally, it's supposed to be a dark fantasy RPG. Undernauts. Wow, I wasn't expecting anybody to mention that game. That's a dungeon crawler in first person with some horror elements. Scarlet Nexus, yes, it's a pretty dark game. Redemption Reapers, of course. Of course. Alright, so let's go back to the PSP, man. For the PSP, I chose Valkyrie Profile. Because I didn't pick it on the PS1, it's gotta be here on the PlayStation Portable. Okay, Valkyrie Profile, I mean, such a dark story, mature story, barely any chit-chat, barely any comedy, goes straight to the point, very mature. It's a dark fantasy game. Sure, it's based on the Norse mythology and stuff like that, but you got a lot of demons, a lot of some vampires are in there. There's a lot of dark fantasy in there. Some creatures, you know, devils and shit like that. And it's a pretty dark game because some of the stories Lenneth, the main character herself, goes through, you know, by just witnessing them. Just that relationship between these characters and how whenever she recruits somebody, how their stories, their tragic stories of some characters, you know, start affecting her, and therefore she starts questioning what she's really doing, and about the Ragnar War and her purpose in the war and her purpose in life, and her past, her tragic past, which is pretty damn dark. Oh my god. So, yeah, you see where I'm going, right? It's kind of hard to explain it without spoiling, but if you play the game, you know it's really freaking dark. So yeah, Valkyrie Profile on the PSP, definitely darker. And I would like to quickly mention my honorable mention, which was going to be Jeanne d'Arc, based on the legendary heroine Joan of Arc. It's not that dark, but there's a couple of things that happen in there that are dark as hell. That are like, I can't believe they did this. It's such a dark game. What about you guys? Okay, Persona 3 Portable, definitely. Persona 2 Innocent Sin was almost my pick. I was like Valkyrie Profile, or Jeanne d'Arc, or Persona 2 Innocent Sin. Fate Extra, I did consider the game. There's a lot of darkness, and it doesn't get like really dark until the end. The ending is like mind-blowingly dark. Like, what the hell, man? And finally, Grow Lancer 4. Yeah, mature story, political stuff. If you choose the dark routes, it gets dark real fast. Definitely, man. Grow Lancer 4, Wayfarer of Time. Definitely dark. Okay, moving on to the PlayStation Vita. Soul Sacrifice. I mean, come on. The game is designed to be dark, edgy, bloody, just ridiculously mature. Yeah, Soul Sacrifice. I mean, it's more dark in the fact that the storytelling is it's just the scenery. You play the game at the beginning and you talk to this book and you read through the characters' situations and what they went through, and it's just really freaking dark. But yeah, the fighting, the monster design, and all that jazz, you know, it's dark fantasy, obviously. But the plot itself, the premise about you being this kind of prisoner in there, and your goal is to, without spoiling, is to fight this big evil guy who ruined everything for you. So, Soul Sacrifice, definitely, man. I mean, it's just the darkest JRPG on the PS Vita by far. What about you guys? God Eater, the second game, or the first one? Both games are dark. The God Eater games are dark naturally because they're post-apocalyptic games about characters in a tragic situation trying to fight for their lives against these giant, horrendous monsters, right? So yeah, definitely the God Eater series. Persona 4 Golden, yeah, we already mentioned that on the PS2, but yeah, it counts. Freedom Wars definitely was going to be my pick, but I think Soul Sacrifice is much darker. But Freedom Wars, definitely, man. Stranger of Sword City, yeah, there's a lot of art style in there that is kind of dark, and the plot itself is kind of dark, also kind of apocalyptic-ish. What no one's gonna mention, Valhalla Knights 3, because nobody played it. But yeah, check Valhalla Knights 3, it's like Drakengard. Like politically incorrect, more on the humor, dark humor side of things, but it's just the dark. Finally, someone mentioned Trillion God of Destruction. Yeah, I see what you mean by that. Definitely. Alright, we're done with PlayStation, people. Let's move on with Nintendo. And for the NES, I picked Faxanadu. I mean, what's there? What else is there on the NES? Most of the RPGs released on the NES that are dark never came out of Japan. We only got the good ones, the positive ones, the light-hearted ones. But Faxanadu, I picked Faxanadu simply because it has some dark fantasy monsters and enemies in there. And I don't like the game, to be honest. I don't think it's a good game. It has a lot of fans. It's a cult classic, and yeah, I just don't like it, man. But I think it's just the darkest NES JRPG I could find. What about you guys? Crystalis? Crystalis, I consider it, but I mean, there's barely anything dark in there. It's just, no, not really. Earthbound, well, we never got the original NES version until much later on the Wii U, I think. But yeah, I guess it could count, but I haven't played it. I don't have an opinion on Earthbound. And Deadly Towers, I mean, let's move on. That's a terrible game, man. Super Nintendo, Terranigma. I was gonna pick Ogre Battle, March of the Black Queen, because of the political stuff and shit. It's not a power of friendship type of RPG. And Terranigma, it goes dark when it needs to. The entire Quintet trilogy, Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, have some dark stuff in there. But I think the darkest of them all is Terranigma, because naturally, there's some I don't want to spoil anything, but some things happen in the game that make you question, like, what's up with this game? Maybe that's a reason why it never came to North America. No, I don't think so. It never came out to North America because it was released pretty late in the Super Nintendo era. The 64 was already out, the PlayStation, so probably, right? But Terranigma definitely is probably the darkest JRPG on the Super Nintendo, but I'll be honest, it's not that dark. I mean, there isn't a single JRPG on the Super Nintendo, in my opinion, that can be considered like, wow, it's really dark? Not really. But Terranigma is the best I can think of. Or someone saying Final Fantasy VI. Yeah, because of the plot twist. What happens with Kefka halfway through the game. That's just horrible. That's pretty damn dark. And some mature themes are in there. Definitely Final Fantasy VI. Let's move on to this Nintendo 64. Ogre Battle. I mean, what else is there? Ogre Battle, like I said before, is just a game that focuses on the political stuff, on the corruption stuff, on liberating towns from oppression. I mean, that's pretty much dark in itself, right? That's a mature setting in there. Ogre Battle, it's all about war. War themes are usually darker than your average power of friendship saving the world trope, right? So there you go. That's my one only argument. The game isn't that dark, but it is dark, and some creatures in there, some enemy design in there, and some lore about the game itself, the universe itself, it's kind of dark. It's not that dark, but it's dark nonetheless. And you know what? Let's move on, because there's nothing else that is remotely dark. If you mention games like Paper Mario or Quest 64, come on. Let's move on straight to the GameCube. Okay, I picked Baten Kaito's Origins. Not the first one. Sure, the first one has this plot twist that's famous, right? But not really. I don't think the first game is that dark. Origins is darker, much darker. A lot of things in this game happen because of its dark, mature settings. What happens with the main character is pretty interesting. It's pretty dark. Not on the same level as a game like Xenogears, for example, but it's really weird what happens with the main character. I think it's a good game, and I think it's brutally hard, but I also believe it's a really good story, man. What about you guys? Lost Kingdoms, 2 people mentioned it, thank you. It's pretty much a dark fantasy setting. Path of Radiance, okay, yeah, it's one of the darkest Fire Emblem games, definitely. Moving on to the Wii, Pandora's Tower. I still can't fathom why it didn't get a mature rating. Lucky for it, it didn't. Probably because it was completely localized and translated in Europe, right? And maybe when they localized it to North America, the ESRB didn't care for it. But I mean, come on. One of the most disturbing games in history. I mean, how do you have this girl that's slowly transforming into a demon, into a horrible creature, and needs to feed on hearts of the monsters? And you see the animations that are freaking disgusting. I mean, Pandora's Tower is one of the darkest JRPGs in this entire video, not just on the Wii. It's ridiculous. One of the darkest JRPGs or video games in a Nintendo system. It's just, it's wow. Anyway, enough said, guys. What about you guys? Xenoblade Chronicles. Nah. The last story definitely has some dark moments, but not really. Super Paper Mario. Some of you just can't resist the trolling, huh? And Arc Rise Fantasia, for sure. That's a game that goes dark in levels, in unimaginable levels. Like, there's a lot of tragedy involved in there, and that's all I'm gonna say. Alright, moving on to the Wii U. What the hell is on the Wii U other than Xenoblade Chronicles X? And I haven't really played it. I only played it for half an hour. But from what I know, it's one of the darkest Xenoblade games. But I wouldn't know. Can't comment on it. Should I pick Revenant Saga instead? It's a Kemco RPG that's about revenge. But even though it's about revenge and it has some dark themes into it, it's a pretty light-hearted game. So maybe not really. Maybe I should have picked it instead. But Xenoblade Chronicles X is a better game. And that's it. Let's move on to the Switch. For the Switch, okay, Reapers. Redemption Reapers, man. Naturally, I think it's a dark fantasy setting. Horrible things happening there in the beginning. The entire game, the colors, the visuals, the animations, the blood and gore. You know, there's barely any gore, but there's a lot of blood in there. Yeah, definitely Redemption Reapers. So that's my pick. And I'm not gonna go into detail because I've covered that game to death. And I know you guys are tired of seeing me talk about it. So there you go. Redemption Reapers. What about you guys? Okay, Shin Megami Tensei 5. Naturally, it was either Redemption Reapers or Nocturne. It's also on Switch. Or Shin Megami Tensei 5. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, definitely. And of course, Death and Request 2, 1 and 2 are also available on the Switch. Let's move on with the Game Boy / Game Boy Color. I'm not that knowledgeable in those systems, so I'm putting them together. So I picked Demon Slayer. That's called Revelations the Demon Slayer. It's pretty much part of the Digital Devil Children arc, I think, of Shin Megami Tensei. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a game for beginners, and it's not as dark. It's one of the less dark Shin Megami Tensei games, but what else is there, right? I mean, it's gotta be that one. And no need to explain it. It's a Shin Megami Tensei game. You recruit demons, you fight demons, you blah blah blah. I mean, come on. Needs no explanation. Every Shin Megami Tensei game is dark by nature. So what about you guys? Game Boy Color. I mean, Gargoyle's Quest, maybe? Because you play as a gargoyle from a dark fantasy universe of ghosts and goblins? For the Game Boy Advance, I got Tactics Ogre, The Knight of Lodis. It's part of the Ogre series, where it's its own game, self-contained story, you know. It takes place in the same universe, but it's its own thing. And I'm only choosing it because it's naturally a dark theme, a political about war, barely any chit chat. It's not like there's a lot of strategy RPGs that are about war and politics, you know, but there's also about the power of friendship and stuff like that. And the Knight of Lodis is kind of different, you know, it goes into a different direction than that. And there's some mature themes in there, and obviously you're not gonna get your average, like I said before, like power of friendship, saving the world type of characters or cast. No way. So definitely the Tactics Ogre. What about you guys? Onimusha Tactics, yeah, I consider it because of the dark themes. It is inspired by the Onimusha series, which are dark action games on the PS2, naturally, but it wasn't as dark as Tactics Ogre. Golden Sun 2, The Lost Age. Yeah, because you play as the bad guys, right? And there's some dark themes in there. I never finished that game, so I can't talk much about it, but I get it. Riviera, The Promised Land. You're probably mentioning that game because of the angels and the religious themes in there. But again, yeah, I see the darkness, but it focuses more on the relationships and the bonds and the little harem that goes on in there. So, yeah, I get it. Yggdra Union, yeah, another war RPG. No one's gonna mention the Sacred Stones. It has dark fantasy elements. You fight zombies and big spiders and big monsters, horrible creatures in there. And the Sacred Stones, in my opinion, is one of the darkest Fire Emblem games of all time. That's it for the Game Boy Advance. Let's move on to the Nintendo DS. Surprisingly, I didn't pick any single Shin Megami Tensei games. Instead, I picked Valkyrie Profile, Covenant of the Plume. I mean, oh boy, you play as this guy who is angry and edgy as hell, swears revenge on Lenneth, because she pretty much took his father and that ruined his family. Wow, I mean, wow. And it's pretty dark. This is a game with several routes and endings, okay? And most of the routes are just as dark. And again, like in the first Valkyrie Profile, most of the characters you recruit come with this tragic or dark as hell backstory. Most of them, not all of them, but some of them are like, what the hell, you know, it's pretty dark. And you also fight a lot of monsters that are like pretty much dark fantasy. Right, you fight a lot of soldiers, your average Joe in a uniform, but you also fight a lot of creatures, all like they come straight out of a dark fantasy game. And no wonder the Valkyrie Profile games, one of the reasons why I love them so much is because of that, because they take place in this kind of dark fantasy setting, and I love that. Okay, so Covenant of the Plume, I mean, this character, and he makes a pact with pretty much Hell, the Queen of Hell, so he can have the plume to sacrifice his allies. What? I mean, it's just the darkest JRPG on the Nintendo DS, man. Come on. What about you guys? Strange Journey, obviously. Contact, I never finished it. I've heard it's kind of dark, and I did play a little bit of it, but I didn't get to the dark part of it. Lunar Nights, yeah, it's kind of dark because of one of the main characters, pretty much his story arc is a little bit on the dark, kind of mature side of things. Obviously, Devil Survivor or anything from the SMT series. Radiant Historia, yeah, it's a bit darker, you know, because you get to experience a lot of tragedy that you can avert by going back in time and change the events, right? Yeah, why didn't I think of that? You're right, Radiant Historia, but none of your mentions come close to Covenant of the Plume. It's just ridiculously dark, man. The World Ends With You? Well, okay, Nights in the Nightmare. Yeah, that's a bad game in my opinion, but yeah, it's dark. Moving on to the Nintendo 3DS. Well, okay, Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey. I didn't include it. I didn't pick it on the Nintendo DS, so of course I gotta pick it on the 3DS. Why that and not Apocalypse? Why that and not 4 or the Devil Survivor games? Because I just felt that Strange Journey had the darkest story and the most mature cast. You don't have these kids like in Apocalypse or Devil Survivor, like high school students and shit. No, you don't have that. You don't have that humor, that immaturity of it. You know, don't take me wrong. Those games are still dark as hell. Shin Megami Tensei 4, the original, it's a close second. You know, but I'm pretty sure Strange Journey beats it. You know, it's just so dark. Not a lot of humor. Most of it's mature stuff with soldiers going into unknown territory in the Antarctica. So it has a lot of mysteries, a lot of horror elements in there happening there. And oh my god, man, yeah, it's a story that blows you away because of how dark it is. Strange Journey is definitely the king of dark JRPGs on 3DS. What about you guys? Etrian Odyssey Untold. Can't really comment on it because I barely touched it, you know. I played the original, that's a remake of the original game on the Nintendo DS, and I wasn't a fan of the series, so... Stella Glow, come on, no, man. Well, Awakening has some dark fantasy elements, you're right, you fight zombies, just like in Sacred Stones, you know, there's a lot of darkness in there. Yeah, Awakening, it's a pretty dark game now that I think about it. Sure, the story doesn't make any sense, but yeah. The Alliance Alive, yeah, because of the theme. Now let's move on to the Xbox. The original Xbox, I don't have a pick for you because there's only like 2 or 3 JRPGs, and okay, can I play Blackstone? It's inspired by Baldur's Gate and the Gauntlet series, but not really. There's barely any story in there. It's 95% gameplay. You fight some dark enemies, some monsters, some yeah. I mean, let's move on to the Xbox 360 with Nier. I didn't pick Nier on the PlayStation 3, so of course I had to save it for the Xbox 360, okay? Nier Gestalt, one of the darkest JRPGs of all time, top 5 darkest JRPGs of all time, man. That ending, that plot twist at the end, you're like, holy crap, you feel so miserably and powerless, you're like, oh wow. And it's such a dark game, it starts dark, it gets dark after a while. Kaine is such a dark character. The dialogue, the political incorrectness of the characters, I mean, Yoko Taro, one of the darkest writers up there, you know, in the JRPG industry. It had to be Nier, man, definitely. What about you guys? Lost Odyssey, The Last Remnant. Yeah, I can see why you're saying that. Operation Darkness was gonna be my pick, but I was like, no, I didn't pick Nier for the PS3, so I'm definitely choosing it for the 360. But Operation Darkness is a dark fantasy game, combined with World War II enemies and the Nazis and the vampires are there, werewolves. Yeah, Operation Darkness, definitely, man. Let's move on with the Xbox One, and I picked Code Vein. Again, I didn't choose Code Vein on PlayStation 4, so I'm choosing it here on the Xbox One. Even though I've never played it there, I played the PS4 version. But yeah, Code Vein is one of the darkest JRPGs of modern age, of this day and age. It's about a bunch of characters that are basically vampires, known as the Revenants, you know, but they're basically vampires. They need blood to survive, but they don't want to become the Lost, which are monsters that go out of control. And how this world came into existence. Every time you beat a mission in this game, you complete a mission, you go down into some kind of twisted and dark and foggy memory lane trip with your main character, walking slowly through those memories. I love those moments because you start knowing a little bit more about the lore and about what happened. Why are these characters like this? Why did humans become vampires, all of them? And what's going on with the world? And it's so dark what happened, the ending, the twist, when you get everything explained to you. That's just ridiculous, man. That's like, what the hell? Right? I could go on. I'm such a fanboy of Code Vein that I could go on, guys. So what about you? Scarlet Nexus was already mentioned in PS4, definitely. Also the Nier games, Nier Replicant, thanks for bringing it up. Fuga, Melodies of Steel, it's also available on Xbox One, you're right. So yeah, it's kind of dark. The setting is kind of dark. Kids, their families have been kidnapped or murdered by the war, so it's a pretty dark game, and yeah, especially the second one. Octopath Traveler 1 and 2. Yeah, I consider those, they have their dark moments, alright, they do have some dark moments in there. The Diofield Chronicle, that's another game that I consider for this video. It's pretty dark, it's pretty mature. And finally, the Xbox Series X, so I picked Infinite Wealth. It's also available on the Xbox Series X, right? I mean, Infinite Wealth is the direct sequel to Yakuza Like a Dragon. Yeah, same reasons as before, guys. This is a game that takes place in a world of crime. There's a lot of guns and violence and smoking and alcohol and drinking and drugs and prostitutes and you know what I mean, right? I mean, this is a politically incorrect game. And it doesn't get any more incorrect than these games. Yakuza, the Yakuza series, one of the... yeah. Infinite Wealth, that's my pick. What about you guys? Persona 3 Reload? It's on Xbox Series X, I didn't know that. So yeah, I guess. This is the third time. Dragon's Dogma 2 maybe? You know, Dragon's Dogma 1 was pretty dark. We should have mentioned that in the PS3 segment and PS4. Let's move on to Sega. Master System. Oh my god, Phantasy Star. Simply because the plot is about revenge. The protagonist's character gets killed at the beginning by this emperor, and she swears revenge and starts a quest just to kill him. Sure, you play the game and you beat it and you're like, it isn't dark really, you know, but what else is there? What the hell else is there? On the Master System, most of the dark JRPGs never came out of Japan. So, there you go. Moving on to the Sega Genesis. You'll be surprised I picked Light Crusader, just because it's a bit of a dark fantasy setting. This warrior gets hired by the king and queen because some horrible things have been happening around town, some kidnappings and some murders, you know, some killings in there. So he gets sent to the dungeons to deal with these creatures that are like dark fantasy-ish. So it's not really a game that focuses on its story, you know, but I mean, what else is there? The Phantasy Star series, the Shining Force series, come on, that would have been predictable, and they aren't that dark, to be honest. Moving on to the Sega CD, I picked Dark Wizard. I know most of you don't give a shit about the Sega CD or this game in particular, but it's there. has some dark fantasy stuff. It's a dark fantasy setting after all. It's not that dark, and again, it's not a game that focuses on its story. It's just about the campaign of a certain character. You pick between 4 different characters, and then you go on with their quest, and some of them are darker than others because of revenge, and some conspiracy, and some backstabbing in there, you know? Yeah, so Dark Wizard's definitely the Sega CD. And none of you are gonna mention anything for the Sega CD, so let's just move on straight to the Sega Saturn with Dragon Force. I think Dragon Force is, I'm gonna use the same argument I used with Tactics Ogre. It's a game with war, with political themes, and with some darkness here and there, but it's a mature plot, right? And that's it. It's not really dark fantasy, not really darkness, blood, political incorrectness in there, you know, it's not really, no, but it's there, right? Okay, and finally the Dreamcast, I picked Grandia 2. I couldn't resist. I mean, it's not that dark, right? But I mean, the protagonist, he's an asshole, you know, and then some horrible things happen at the beginning of the game, during the first hour, when you try and go and rescue Elena as her bodyguard, and then the wings of Valmar get inside of her, and then you get Millennia, who's like, she's really hot for Ryudo, and yeah, they don't hide it on the translation, not even on the HD remaster, so yeah. Grandia 2 is naturally a dark JRPG, and it has some dark themes to it, right? But it's not, it's a lot harder game, right? Not, I wouldn't call it like dark fantasy game or something like that, no, but it's the darkest JRPG I could find on the Dreamcast, other than Record of Lodoss War, that I didn't like, and it's a game that barely focuses on its story. Yeah, there's a Record of Lodoss War on the Dreamcast, in case you didn't know. Now you know. You can stop pretending you care. And finally, the Game Gear, there's nothing. There's only 3 JRPGs on the Game Gear. Shining Force, I guess that one. Crystal Warriors, there's nothing dark about it. And Defenders of Oasis, there's nothing dark about it. So I guess Shining Force, the Sword of Haja, even though it's like you play with the kids of the original cast from the original Shining Force. I'm sorry, you know, Game Gear, no way. That is it, guys. That is the video. We made another video. We made the darkest JRPG on every console. It was fun, great, a lot of great mentions from you guys. Thanks for participating. That was a blast to do. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends. See you next time.